am Ankita Peter. I am the counselor from DPS Expressway, and in this program we are going to study about learning and how learning takes place. The process of learning is continuous and that goes on throughout the life. From simple behaviors like switching on the light or picking up a book from the table to complex behaviors like driving a car or piloting a spaceship, all become a reality only due to the process of learning. This lesson will help us understand the different types of learning and how it occurs. After studying this lesson, you will be able to explain the process of learning and its definition, learning by observation, concept learning, skill learning, and transfer of training. You will also be able to describe classical conditioning or learning through association and modification of behavior through reinforcement called operant conditioning. We shall go in detail of these concepts later. First of all, do you know how this learning is defined? It is defined as a relatively durable change in behavior due to experience. Thus, if the change in behavior is temporary or due to instinct or maturation, it is not learning. For example, the maturational changes in the child like crawling, standing and walking at certain ages are not included in learning. On the basis of studies on human beings and on animals, psychologists have tried to explain the process of learning. They have identified some procedures that are used in the acquisition of simple as well as complex responses. The two basic types of learning are classical conditioning and operant or instrumental conditioning. In addition, we have observational learning, verbal learning, concept learning, and skill learning. Let us briefly consider some of the important types of learning. Classical conditioning. Now let us learn about the simplest kind of learning. Classical conditioning or learning through association. It was also known as Pavlovian conditioning because it was discovered by a Russian scientist, Ivan P. Pavlov, who was interested in studying stimulus-response relationship. He experimented with dogs. The animal was harnessed and then food was presented to the dog. Pavlov realized that the salivary response had been learned by the dog. He proceeded to study this type of learning in detail. Pavlov presented the dog a series of trials in which a tone, buzzer, was paired with food, biologically important stimulus. The learning trials consisted of pairing the tone, conditioned stimulus or CS, with food, unconditioned stimulus or UCS. The tone presented was rather short, that was 10 seconds, and the time interval between the tone and the presentation of food was between 2 to 3 minutes. During the initial trials, the dog salivated when the food was presented. Secretion of saliva to food is a natural response, and therefore the saliva is called unconditioned response UR. Later, the buzzer was presented first. It was followed by food. After some pairing trials of buzzer and food, the dog started salivation at the ringing of the buzzer alone. The buzzer is called conditioned stimulus CS because the dog has been conditioned to salivate at the presentation of the buzzer itself. The secretion of saliva on the presentation of buzzer is called conditioned response. It can be observed that originally the sound of the buzzer CS elicits only an orienting response, alerting response, and elicits salivation when the food is consistently presented in close association with the buzzers. Immediately after the buzzer is rung, the animal elicits salivation. This is called acquisition. It has been found that if the buzzer CS is presented on each trial but the food US is not presented, extinction will take place. That is, the buzzer will no more elicit saliva, and if it is continued for some time, extinction will take place. It has also been found that if a gap occurs after extinction and if the buzzer CS is again presented without food, US, the dog will salivate, produce CR for a few trials. This recovery of CR after extinction is called spontaneous recovery. Operant conditioning. The second type of learning which we will learn today is operant conditioning, is modification of behavior through reinforcement. If a child completes the homework, she is praised, rewarded by the parents, and the child learns to perform the task. If the child breaks a plate, he or she is scolded, punished, and she will learn not to repeat the behavior. This is called operant conditioning or instrumental conditioning. In other words, we learn to perform behaviors that produce positive outcomes and avoid behaviors that yield negative outcomes. We may define operant conditioning as a process through which organisms learn to repeat behaviors that produce positive outcomes or escape from the negative outcomes. B. F. Skinner is considered as the most influential psychologist advocating the role of operant conditioning in learning. He developed an experimental chamber called the Skinner box to study learning processes in rats. The chamber included a lever attached to the front wall. Pressing the lever is the response to be learnt. The hungry rat is placed in the chamber and it starts doing random activity in it. After some time, the rat accidentally presses the lever and a pellet of food drops automatically in the plate and the rat eats it. After eating the pellet, the rat again starts activity in the chamber. After some activity, it again presses the lever and gets pellet, a reward. Gradually, the random activity changes to more specific activity around the lever. Finally, the rat learns that pressing the lever results in dropping of the food, a satisfying outcome. In other words, the pressing of lever by the rat is instrumental in providing food, reinforcement. The response, pressing the lever, is reinforced. The behavior is acquired or learned. The pressing of lever by the rat is instrumental in getting the food, a satisfying consequence, positive reinforcement, and that is why this type of learning is also called instrumental learning. It is called operant conditioning because the behavior of rat or any organism is a kind of operant on the environment. Do you know that the role of reinforcement is very crucial in operant conditioning? For example, parents and other authorities attempt to discourage aggressive behaviors by punishing them and reward for good behaviors. Now, let us learn about the different types of reinforcements. Reinforcement is any operation or action that increases the rate of response. It can be positive or negative. Let us understand about the different types of reinforcements. Positive reinforcement. Reinforcement is any operation or action that increases the rate of response. In Skinner's experiment, the rat responded by pressing the lever and obtained food. This is called positive reinforcement. So, a positive reinforcement or reward, example, food, sexual pleasure, etc., in the operation that increases the strength of a specific behavior. Positive reinforcement is any stimulus that strengthens the response precedes it. Example, lever pressing is reinforced by food. Negative reinforcement. Another quite different way of increasing the rate of response is through negative reinforcement. Suppose that in this Skinner box the rat receives electric shock to the feet every second. When the rat presses the lever, the shock is stopped for 10 seconds. This increases the rate of response. This procedure is called negative reinforcement, which involves application of an aversive stimulus. Example, heat, electric shock, scudding, etc. The word negative refers to the nature of the reinforcer, aversive stimulus. It is the reinforcement because it increases the rate of response. In this experiment, the rat can escape the shock if it presses the lever. This procedure is called escape learning. Another kind of negative reinforcement can result in conditioning called avoidance learning, where the rat can avoid the shock by pressing the lever. In escape, or avoidance learning, the reinforcer is negative and the organism learns to escape or avoids its presence. How do we reinforce the correct responses? It could be by using continuous or partial reinforcement. This is discussed in the schedules of reinforcement. Schedules of reinforcement. The continuous reinforcement is useful for establishing or strengthening new behaviors where every correct response is reinforced. For example, when the rat presses the lever every time it gets the food pellet, reinforcement. Alternatively, some of the responses are reinforced partially or intermittently. A continuous reinforcement is useful for establishing or strengthening, on the other hand, is more powerful in maintaining of the acquired behaviors. Let us see what you have learned so far about classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Application of operant conditioning in learning situations. In the conventional learning situation, operant conditioning applies largely to issues of class and student management rather than to learning content. It is very relevant to shaping skill performance. As a student must have observed how a teacher has to put in efforts to shape the behavior of students. This is possible by modifying desired behavior by giving positive reinforcement and reducing unwanted or undesired behavior by giving negative reinforcement. A simple way to shape behavior is to provide feedback on learner performance. Example, compliments, approval, encouragement and affirmation. With reinforcement, example praise, performance improves. For example, a teacher encourages students to answer questions in class by praising them for every attempt they make. Unwanted behaviors are removed by the teacher by ignoring them rather than being reinforced by having attention drawn to them. Knowledge of success is also important as it motivates future learning. However, it is important to vary the type of reinforcement given so that the desired behavior is maintained. Observational learning. You must have noticed that people learn by observing others. Observational learning or modeling is acquiring new skills by observing the behavior of others. It also depends on the existence of appropriate model in one's environment. We learn various social roles through observational learning. For example, young people learn aggression by watching the actions of others, models. Much of the learning to the young people. When children watch violence on TV, they tend to learn such behaviors. We learn various social roles through observation. However, observational learning is a complex process, far more complex than mere imitation. Children acquire information and learn skills through observation, but do not put it into immediate use. People, particularly youngsters, can often be influenced in positive ways when they have appropriate role models. Have you heard about the interesting experiment done by Albert Bandura, popularly known as the Bobo doll experiment? One of the first record instances of observational learning in research was the study performed by Albert Bandura in 1961. This experiment demonstrated that children can learn merely by observing the behavior of a social model. Bandura believed that human beings, unlike animals, are likely to link between their behavior and its consequences. In this experiment, Bandura studied the responses of nursery school-age children. The children were presented with a short film in which an adult model directed aggression towards an inflatable Bobo doll. The experiment was done under three situations. The first, in which the children saw a second adult give the aggressive model candy. In the second, the children saw a second adult scold the model for aggression shown. And the third, in which the children simply saw the model behave aggressively. The results showed that after viewing the film, when children were left alone in a room with the Bobo doll and props used by the adult aggressor, they imitated the actions they had witnessed. Those in the first and the third situations, the children imitated the aggressive acts than in the second situation. Till now, We have read about learning and conditioning. Now, we will read briefly about the other types of learning. Verbal learning. The process of learning language is called verbal learning. You are reading this lesson and trying to understand the concept of learning. This is possible because of verbal learning. Verbal learning. Verbal learning is typically associated with the memorization and retention of list of words in order to describe basic elements of associative learning. It involves more than just the memorization of words. Many stimuli such as pictures, images can be studied. The types of mental events that occur in verbal learning studies go beyond passive memorization, as learners can play a very active role in manipulating experimental stimuli. Among early studies on verbal learning, Hermann Ebbinghaus involved the serial learning of nonsense syllables in his procedure. Ebbinghaus would memorize a list of these syllables until he could recall them perfectly. Next, concept learning. It is about developing categories of objects and events. It is very important in our life that we should discriminate between things on the basis of some criterion. For example, the terms boys, girls, fruits and furniture refer to concepts. A concepts involve variety of objects clubbed together like class, categories, etc. For example, domestic animal is a category which includes many animals. Characterization helps in communicating and performing many activities. All kind of higher learning necessarily involves learning concepts that help us to reduce the complexity of our world. Concepts can be natural or artificial, abstract or concrete. Love, freedom and democracy, table, boy, girl, orange and rose are examples of concrete concepts. Skill learning. An important area of learning involves acquiring various types of skills like riding bicycle, writing, driving a car. Those who are able to learn these skills get more opportunities in life. Once a skill is acquired, with practice it may become automatic. This helps to perform the skill with ease, comfort and spontaneity. So far you have learnt about learning by conditioning and some other types of learning. Now let us know about transfer of training. It refers to the process of using earlier learning in a new situation. Learning transforms a person in many ways and occurs throughout one's life. It can be of three types. Positive transfer. The first learning helps the second learning. For example, learning to drive a car helps in driving trucks also. Negative transfer. The first learning interferes with the second learning. For example, learning lawn tennis and then learning table tennis. Zero transfer. The first learning neither helps nor interferes with the second learning. Here are some tips or suggestions for better study habits. Studying of a topic can be facilitated if you realize that effort and motivation both are important. In order to gain more while preparing a topic or studying the same, you need to attend to the following points. Study at a specific place. You must study in a quiet, well-lighted area free of disturbance. If possible, you should also have at least one place where you only study. Keep magazines, radios, friends and other distractions out of that area. Organize your study through spaced sessions. It is quite reasonable to review intensely before an exam. However, if you are actually learning some topic for the first time, you are asking for trouble. It has been found that spaced practice is a more efficient way to study. It involves a large number of relatively short study sessions rather than one or two long ones, called mass practice. Use memory aids. Psychologists have found many techniques useful for improving memory. Most of them link new information to certain ideas or images that are easy to remember. Try to test yourself. When studying, you can arrange to take several practice tests before the real one in examination. In other words, studying should indicate self-testing by use of flashcards, learning checks, a study guide or questions you ask yourself. overlearning. It has been found that many students do not prepare well for exams and most overestimate how well they will do in exams. A solution to both problems is overlearning. To overlearn, you should continue studying beyond bare mastery of a topic. This means that you need to give yourself time for extra study and review after you think you are prepared for a test. Avoid procrastination. A tendency to procrastinate is almost universal. Procrastinators put off work until the last moment. They work only under pressure, skip classes, and give false reasons for late work. This has negative effect on learning and performance. Use of a formal time schedule and setting up of specific goals may help to study more effectively. Now let us summarize what you have learned earlier. Learning transforms a person in many ways, and that learning occurs throughout one's life. Good learners utilize each and every opportunity as an occasion for learning. The changes that take place in personality, attitude, and interest are also consequences of certain types of learning. They take place in complex ways. As learning progresses, your ability to learn also develops. If you learn, you become a better person, flexible in approach, and competent enough to appreciate the reality. Learning may be defined as a relatively durable change in behavior due to experience. If the change in behavior is temporary or due to instinct or maturation, it is not learning. Learning helps us adapt to our environment. The two basic types of learning are classical conditioning and operant conditioning or instrumental learning. Classical conditioning involves pairing of a neutral stimulus and a natural stimulus, CS and UCS, leading to formation of association between neutral stimulus and response. Operant conditioning is a process through which organisms learn to repeat behaviors that produce positive outcomes or avoid or escape from the negative outcomes. Skinner defined reinforcement as any operation or action that increases the rate of response. In escape or avoidance learning, the reinforcer is negative and the organism learns to escape or avoid its presence. In case of continuous reinforcement, every correct response is reinforced. The process of learning language is also called verbal learning. An important area of learning involves acquiring of skills like riding a bicycle, writing, car driving, piloting an aircraft, leading a group, motivating others, etc. Observational learning is also used in acquiring new skills by observing the behavior of others. Transfer of training refers to the process of using earlier learning in a new situation. It is the positive if the first learning helps the second learning. Learning transforms a person in many ways and occurs throughout one's life. Good learners utilize each and every opportunity as an occasion of learning. I hope this program will be useful for you. Happy learning!
घर बैठे पाएं राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालय शिक्षा संस्थान यानी NIOS में एडमिशन, वो भी एकदम आसान तरीके से, जिससे शिक्षार्थियों को होगी समय और धन दोनों की बचत। NIOS से शिक्षा कभी भी कहीं भी। शिक्षार्थियों, क्या आप जानते हैं NIOS में एडमिशन लेने का सरल और सुगम तरीका, जिससे शिक्षार्थियों को ऑनलाइन प्रवेश लेने में सहूलियत मिलती है। NIOS में प्रवेश की प्रक्रिया पूर्णतया ऑनलाइन है। शिक्षार्थी घर बैठे इंटरनेट द्वारा प्रवेश के लिए सबसे पहले NIOS की वेबसाइट www.nios.ac.in पर लॉगिन करें। अपना ईमेल आईडी और पासवर्ड डालकर अपना पंजीकरण करें। पंजीकरण के बाद लॉगिन करने पर ऑनलाइन प्रवेश हेतु आवेदन पत्र खुलेगा। आवेदन पत्र को निर्देशानुसार भरें और प्रिंट आउट लें। इस प्रिंट आउट पर अपनी फोटो संलग्न करें। ऑनलाइन प्रवेश के लिए शुल्क हेतु भुगतान के तरीके हैं: क्रेडिट कार्ड के द्वारा, डेबिट कार्ड के द्वारा, राष्ट्रीयकृत बैंक के ड्राफ्ट के माध्यम से, जो कि सचिव NIOS नई दिल्ली या नोएडा के पक्ष में देय हो। भरे हुए आवेदन पत्र के साथ साथ डिमांड ड्राफ्ट और संलग्न किए जाने वाले दस्तावेज हैं: जन्म रजिस्ट्रार के जिला कार्यालय से जारी जन्म प्रमाण पत्र की सत्यापित प्रति, जिसमें जन्म तिथि अंकित हो, पिछले विद्यालय से प्राप्त विद्यालय छोड़ने का प्रमाण पत्र, जिसमें आवेदक की जन्म तिथि लिखी हो। प्रवेश फॉर्म का प्रिंट आउट NIOS के संबद्ध क्षेत्रीय केंद्रों पर 10 दिनों में पहुंच जाना चाहिए, अन्यथा उचित दस्तावेज न लगे होने पर आवेदन फॉर्म रद्द किया जा सकता है। प्रवेश प्रक्रिया की पुष्टि होने के बाद शिक्षार्थियों को परिचय पत्र व अध्ययन सामग्री डाक द्वारा तुरंत पहुंचाई जाती है। ऑनलाइन प्रवेश एक बहुत ही सुगम और सुविधाजनक प्रवेश प्रणाली है। ऑनलाइन ऑन टाइम फॉर सेफ एंड सिक्योर एडमिशन।
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने, हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने। हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने। जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने।
धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो, धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो।
कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े, वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो।
कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े, वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो।
मित्रों हम उठे और जागे,
मंजिल आने की ध्वनि सुने। हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने।
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने।